Morning, everybody. Jules said, will you be moving around a bit? And I said, what do you think, Jules? So, we're going to look at Genesis 33 in a minute, but I'm going to do a little shout out for the book club. So, I stopped working quite as much, in theory, in July, and I thought, oh, I'll do other things. So I joined the book club. And this is the latest book that we should have finished reading. I haven't quite finished it, but it is certainly the first part relates very much to what we're doing in church at the moment, in that it talks about the beginning. But I'd like to read various bits of it to start with, because initially the author talks about why he's written this book. And he says, A.W. Tozer once claimed, what comes into your mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you. We agree. Identity, behavior, purpose, meaning, everything flows from what we believe about God. It's that important. If we miss God, we miss everything. If we know God, we gain everything. The God story, before it is anything else, is God's way of telling us who God is and who we are in the light of God. So I'm not saying you should join the book club. A good book to read, but feel free to join the book club. But sometimes just small sentences and phrases hit you, don't they? Everything flows from God. If we know God, we gain everything. And part of going through Genesis is learning about God and about the beginnings of Israel, but also about understanding ourselves and knowing ourselves more. So, my first illustration demands some string. For those of you that don't know, I've been a teacher for 40 years, and I remember, I think it was Alice said to me not that long ago, Mum, now you've stopped teaching, can you stop being a teacher, please? And I said, I've been doing it for 40 years, Alice. Give me another 40, and I might have forgotten how to do it, but that's unlikely. So in teaching, one of the things that you do in your lessons is you always recap what's gone before, okay? So I need 1, 2, 3 volunteers, please, if you'd like to come to the front. No, not you, Evie. You're all right, sweetie. It's had to be a gentleman. So, okay. So, if we think about Genesis and we think about the story that is the beginning of Israel, we start with Abraham. Abraham was blessed by God. He was blessed in his life. He was blessed with children, but he was also blessed by God in that God said, from you there will be a nation, a great nation. When Abraham died, he passed that blessing on to Isaac, because tradition said that whatever you had, you gave to your firstborn son, Isaac. Well, perhaps not his firstborn son, but his favourite son. And then Isaac then had 2 children, Jacob and Esau. Okay? Now, if we think about that, who was the firstborn? Okay. So, is that what happened? It isn't, is it? Well, that's a bit annoying, isn't it? So, sorry, Esau, would you like to? Oh. So, Jacob, would you mind being Jacob? Yeah? Now, Jacob's a bit of a one, isn't he? Sorry, that's aggressive. Even in his mother's womb, and as he's being born, he's grabbing a hold of Esau as if to say, don't you think you're coming out without me, mate, because I want what you should have. And he gets Esau's blessing. But this guy, throughout a lot of his life, fights for that blessing. But he will not give up. He wants God's blessing, and he wants all that that brings. Okay? So when I was thinking about this message, and I know it's entitled something very different to what I'm actually going to be talking about, sorry, Nick, is this idea of blessing. Because Abraham was blessed by God. He passed not only everything he owned, but that blessing onto Isaac. Isaac. And then it was passed, rightly or wrongly, onto Jacob, not Esau. But that blessing was passed. And what a blessing it was. Thank you, boys. Well done for holding a piece of string. Okay. So what's going to happen is I'm going to go through this particular chapter. We're going to pick things out. And whenever I ask God, what are you wanting me to say? And I'll tell you something, because Jonathan and I talked about this yesterday and last night, and he's saying, have you done it yet? Have you done it yet? And I'm like, I'm working on it. I usually like to think, right, this is what I know God wants me to say to you. And it's like there are lots of little things this week, so like we've already heard this morning, so it's a bit different. But the first one is blessing, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. Okay? So, in this particular chapter, it follows from what Jonathan said last week. Jacob has a little bit of a struggle with God. He meets God, and he holds on to God, and he says, you're not going to leave me until you've blessed me. This isn't the first time he's met God, and it won't be the last time that he's had an experience of God. So the next thing I want to say is, I don't know about you, I know about me, and I know what other people have said to me. We have experiences of God, and after that we think, I'm going to be changed, I'm going to be transformed, I'm going to be this perfect person now I've had this encounter with God. And it doesn't quite happen like that, does it? Because we are changed a step at a time. And Jacob is a very prime example of that happening. And we see this as we go through this chapter. So if you wouldn't mind just putting the words of this particular chapter up there, that'd be fabulous. So we know what happened in the previous chapter, but just to remind you what God promised Abraham first. He said, I will make you into a great nation, I will bless you, I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Some blessings we don't see the fruit of. This blessing was then passed on to Isaac, should have been passed on to Esau, but wasn't, was passed on to Jacob. Okay? Now, the next thing, Esau, I don't really know about Esau. You see, earlier, he's come back from hunting and he said to Jacob, I'm starving. And Jacob said, well, if you give me your birthright, I'll give you some soup. And he agrees to it. And I'm like, why would you do that? Just because Jonathan said, well, he was hungry. That's not really a good enough reason, is it? So, And then is a bit cross. Well, I think he's okay to be cross when Jacob deceives him and his dad to get the blessing. And he's really, really cross, so much so that Jacob decides it's time to leave. Okay? So years later, Jacob's had this encounter, this latest encounter with God, but we don't know what's happened with Esau. Do you know when you see films and the book is better than the film because it gives you more information? Really upsets Jonathan. He doesn't like watching films that don't follow a book. And I feel like this bit about Esau doesn't give us enough information. And I'll come back to that in a minute. So we're at a point where Jacob's been told Esau's coming and he's got 400 men with him. Jacob's had this experience with God. God said, I'm telling you, I am keeping my promise. I am going to bless you, and you will be called Israel. He's got that in his head there, and over here, he's got Esau coming towards him with 400 men. And he's also got all his servants and all his family to protect. So what he does is he puts the servants first. He puts his, can I say this, lesser wife, and then he puts his favourite wife and son at the back. Not sure what I think about that, but anyway. The thing that strikes me here is I think the old Jacob would have quite happily stood amongst them. But this meeting with God means that he goes to the front to meet Esau. He's put them in order of, if they're going to get killed, I know which ones to get killed first and which ones go last, kind of thing. But he's still gone ahead of them. And at this point, this is what I don't get. See, Esau, although he'd sort of not been that bothered about his birthright over a bowl of soup, he was then very bothered when it was cheated out of him, and he was very angry. And this is their first meeting since that happened. Now, what Jacob has tried to do is, I don't know, you could say buy his way back into Esau's favour by sending all these animals, etc., to Esau. But he still doesn't know what Esau's response is going to be. So he does what is a custom, and he bows down 7 times. You know, I'm really sorry. No, I'm really, really, really sorry, and all that kind of stuff. But what does Esau do? He holds him, and he cries, and it says, and they both wept. I don't know, this frustrates me, you can tell. I don't know what happened between Esau being very angry when he'd been cheated out of his birthright until that moment. We know what had happened to Jacob, but was it that Esau thought, well, I've got everything that I thought I was going to get with that birthright, so I don't need to worry about the fact I haven't got it? Or was it, do you know what? Family comes first. What does it matter now? I don't know. But the bottom line is, at that point, there was reconciliation for both of them. And they both wept. Never underestimate the power of tears to let out those feelings of anger, unforgiveness, frustration. And I think part of this would have been joy, that actually after all this time they'd finally been able to come together. And Esau then says, who are all these people? And Jacob talks about how he's been blessed. And there is this thing that he talks about, that these are the things that God has graciously given. So they've both been blessed. Now, what is the difference between these two blessings? Esau says, I don't need what you're going to give me. I've already got it all. Jacob has got everything, all these animals and wives, but what is the thing that Jacob has got that Esau hasn't got? God's blessing. I don't know whether Esau's even aware that that's part of the package that he got, that Jacob got when he cheated Esau. But there's the difference with the blessings. Okay. So we've got a situation where there's forgiveness, there's reconciliation, and Jacob is still insistent that Esau has all the animals, everything that he wants to give him. Esau says, I don't want them, I've got loads, I don't need them. What I wanted was this. What I wanted was this. But Jacob says, no, I want you to have them. Why do you think Jacob said, no, I need you to have these animals? Guilt. He knew what he'd done was wrong. He'd lived his life knowing that. Hadn't stopped him doing it and didn't stop him doing anything again, but he knew that he'd done the wrong thing. So he said, no, please take these animals, and Esau graciously did. Okay. Now, this is the crux, really, in that then Esau says, okay, come back with me, let's get together. We'll all go back to my place together, all of us. And then, what does Jacob do? He deceives him again. And I'm going to say something that might sound a little bit weird. I find that really encouraging. Do you know why? Because however much God blesses us, we still make a mess of it. And our characters do not change overnight. We are changed from one degree of glory to another. And Jacob still hasn't quite made it. So he deceives Esau. And he says to Esau, well, do you know what? We're all a bit tired. How about you go back to your place and we'll rest and sit here for a bit, and then I'll come. Outright lie, because he has no intentions of going that way. Now, part of the reason he has no intention of going that way is because of the promise that God has made to him. That blessing that went straight down the line, God has told Jacob to go back to the place where Abraham was. Not where Esau is, but where Abraham was. I don't know why he couldn't tell Esau that information, why he couldn't say, well, this is what God has said. But then I think, well, was it still guilt? Because I've got what you should have had. So he doesn't actually tell him. So they go on their way, and they eventually, now I have to get the name right because it's a weird word that I can't say. They go to Shechem, I think, something like that. And then, let me get the Bible right way up, that would help. He makes an altar. And this altar, I'm not going to read what it says. Its translation is God, the God of Israel. So it's not just saying I'm making this altar for God. I'm saying this is my God because God is calling me Israel. Yeah? He built an altar and called it God, the God of Israel. So, if we think about what does this tell us about God, this tells us that God blesses people. What it tells us about the people in this story, especially Jacob, is Jacob wanted that blessing. He fought with God. He held on to him. I won't let you go until you bless me. That's the end of the last chapter. And that blessing begins when he gets here, because this is where Abraham had put his tent down, if you like, but he didn't own it. When Jacob gets here, he buys that area. So the step towards this nation becoming a reality is one step closer. And when you see it, if you read this book, it gives you a very nice, if you like, coherent picture of the way it goes. But Jacob was a man that wanted a blessing. And that challenged me. I'm quite happy to pray, God bless somebody else. But you almost feel guilty when you say, God bless me. Doesn't sound quite right, does it? But yet, Jacob fought hard to get that blessing from God. So my challenge to you is, you might like to think, do you know what? It's not such a bad thing to ask for God's blessing. Why can't I ask for blessing for my life and for my family and for who I am as much as I ask for blessing for other people? Okay? So there was the idea of blessing. And then lastly, because I don't think we need to talk for very long about this. Jacob comes full circle. He comes back to the place where Abraham had sojourned, if you like. And it is important for us to understand that if we end up in a how can I put this? Sometimes you feel like things haven't changed. I've gone back. I've gone full circle. Things in my life haven't changed. But we have to keep hold of the promises and the blessing of God. And what God promises, he will make happen. Now, that piece of string wasn't very long, was it? But how long that took was hundreds of years. And then a few thousand years before Israel became a nation and we are where we are now. So the other thing that I want you to hold on to is that when God promises you a blessing, promises you something, don't lose it because of time. And that's hard. It's hard. And sometimes we have to wrestle with God over it, and we might have to argue with him a bit and say, I'm finding this really tough. But if he's promised you something, that piece of string can be a very long piece of string. So my challenge to you this morning, there have been lots of them. Jacob was a man that wanted something. He wanted Esau's birthright. He wanted God's blessing. He didn't change overnight. Every time he encountered God, he changed a little bit more. But he was still a little bit rough around the edges, a little bit of a deceiver, a little bit of a manipulator. And you'll read later on what happens next. But the bottom line is, God was for him. Despite who he was, God was for him. It's interesting because these three people are mentioned a lot in the New Testament. So then I thought, well, I'm going to look up a few of those, and this is the one that really struck me, and this is my final point. It's in Romans 9, and the writer is talking about the historicity of Israel, if you like. And he talks about, I'll go from verse 10. This son was our ancestor Isaac. When he grew up, he married Rebekah, who gave birth to twins. Before they were born, before they had done anything good or bad, she received a message from God. This message proves that God chooses according to his own plan, not according to our good or bad works. She was told, the descendants of your older son will serve the descendants of the younger son. In the words of these scriptures, I loved Jacob, but I rejected Esau. And I say, was God being unfair? It's not. For God said to me, I will show mercy to anyone, and I show compassion to anyone I choose. And that speaks to me about the sovereignty of God. And sometimes we miss that. We make God this, I'm not wishing to be offensive when I say this, we make God this fluffy father. Yeah. And we forget how big he is, and we forget that he's God. And if he's God, he can bless us in ways that are far beyond what we even imagine. So please, in your relationship with God, remember he's God, but remember he loves you, remember he wants to bless you, and remember you're not the finished article quite yet. Okay, thank you very much.